This video is brought to you by Milanote. Do you ever look at your pet and think, how could this fluffy, diminutive, adorable vessel possibly embody the depths of your vast capabilities? Surely, in another universe, your true form must reflect the eldritch being that dwells behind thine eyes.
In other words, what would my cat, Tiger, affectionately known as the executive producer of this channel, look like in an alternate universe where everything is a fantasy RPG? If my cat and I got isekai together, what would the vibe be? Over the past couple of years, I've been slowly spiraling out of control as I continuously add on to the suit of armor and sword set. It's one of my most fun and enjoyable things to wear at Ren Fair because the folks there always have the kindest reactions. It is also, as one may guess, incredibly uncomfortable and difficult to walk in. So obviously, my question is, how do I make this already unwieldy costume even more elaborate and unwearable? Should I add a puppet that my hand has to pilot all day while I sweat and suffer in my already immobilizing armor? I think that's a fair idea.
Did I mention I'm only spending 7 days on this?
In all seriousness, these dragon creature facade puppets are one of the coolest things I've seen people create in the maker community. I've been obsessed with creature work and practical effects like this my entire life. It's just something that happens to you whenever you watch the Lord of the Rings extended edition behind the scenes on repeat for an entire summer at a young age. So something like this in tandem with an original costume that I've made that together adds more depth to it is absolute Kira catnip. Obviously, those of you who are tapped into the creative / maker YouTube metal will recognize this concept from a video that Maksy put out last year, where she made a puppet of Drogon from Game of Thrones. And ever since then, I've been getting requests from quite a few of you for me to do something similar, and you guys just know me too well because I've been planning on doing something like this since I learned that they existed. But it wouldn't be a me project without the Kirification of it all, which essentially means making it more difficult than it has to be. So dragons, very cool, very natural to execute with this idea since their anatomy is somewhat pool noodle-esque. It's flexible and fits well with how you have to drape a puppet over your body and put your hand into it. Now, a weird cat-adjacent creature, maybe not so much. There she is. So the thing about cat creatures that's different from dragon creatures is while cats do have the reputation for being quite long, hold on, let's demonstrate your length. Can you be long? Good long. They still don't have that same noodle-necked flexibility of a dragon. Oh, did you drop it? Oh, I'm sorry. I got more for you. So that's one of the many reasons why we're going to have to go for fantasy cat creature territory. I'm hoping with the addition of a much longer neck and lanky midsection and torso, I will be able to engineer a cat creature that I also can puppet. Thank you for your services, executive producer. That was very helpful.
It's gonna take a lot of research and planning to figure out what I'm doing here because I not only have a creature to make, I have to also figure out how to get it to move. But thankfully, I have the help of this video's sponsor, Milanote, to organize this project. Milanote is an incredible tool for artists and crafters because it allows me to organize projects in a way that makes sense for my particular workflow. Which, if you've been here for even one of my videos, you'll know that my workflow is basically so you'll know that my boards are also basically. For this project, I chose the Craft Project Plan template out of over 100 built-in options because it gave me some great prompts to begin my exploration. Early on, the main goal is trying to narrow down what I want the design of my creature to look like and try to find the happy medium between that and how to make the puppet functional. So gathering a lot of visual inspiration and exploring possibilities was super important for building out my first inspo board here, which I used Milanote's Web Clipper browser extension for constantly. This makes the research process go so much faster since I can add images and links I stumble across on the web to my board with the click of a button. And this board is different from my concept art board, which begins to dive a lot deeper into the specific design of the creature. The array of tools they include is incredible for brainstorming and finding exactly the kind of design I want. I love that I can keep my key color palettes on my board to keep themes strong and consistent. I love how simple it is to add notes and arrows all over my boards to easily connect ideas. And I especially love the draw tool, which allows me to scribble all over my boards and add diagrams, which especially came in handy whenever I was highlighting my tabby cat's markings. Finally, since Milanote is also great for collaboration, you can easily invite colleagues to leave feedback and work together in real time on a board using the editor link. So I invited a friend of mine who's also familiar with the unique personality of the executive producer to help me brainstorm a bit. I find Milanote super helpful for organizing my creative projects, especially projects like this with a lot of little details. So if you'd like to use it for your own creative pursuits, you can sign up for free with no time limit using my link in the description box. Thank you so much to Milanote for sponsoring this video, and if you do give Milanote a try, please let me know in the comments. So the first order of business, according to my extensive scheming and research, I think is going to be to try to figure out
what I'm doing with the head. All of the magic, all of the puppetry and mechanisms is really just going to be focused in that one area, so I think it's really important at the beginning that I get that figured out and make sure that it's functional before I go and worry about the body. I mean, it's just going to be in essence like a big sack stuffed with stuffing and then having a couple of limbs coming off of it. How hard could that be? I think that I need to start out with some kind of a base or like a face shell so that I have something firm that I can like put my hand into and move the jaw up and down. So I am once again going to rely on the kindness of the wonderful artisans over on Etsy, and I'm gonna buy a pattern from one of them. So here are my options. I thought about this guy. I thought about using this little fella. I mean, you know, it's a cat skull. You would think that a cat skull would be good to use as a cat skull, but ultimately, I think I'm gonna settle on this one because I think that this is going to provide like the best base for me to work on and maybe sculpt on top of to get exactly what I want. This pattern is by Lilith Cosplay, by the way. So I am going to print it out and see what we're working with. One of the great things about working with a pattern like this with all these tiny little pieces is that it's a great foam stash busting project.
Finally, I can be rid of you.
We now have the beginnings of a cat head. It's a little wonky right now because it's such thin foam, so the head is sort of like, but this is a good base. I can definitely work with this. Producer, would you like to see your likeness? Hey, this is what you look like. What do you think? Head empty, no thoughts? So as I so clearly just demonstrated, this mask has the structural integrity of a dandelion. So I kind of did an incredibly messy job putting this mask together. I was in a rush, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to cover most, if not all of this up. This is just gonna be a base. And I'm going to do that with foam clay. If I knew where it was, let me find it. Foam clay. So before I start messing around with this, I'm going to attempt to add some structural integrity to this by coating some of the foam in some warbler scraps. That way I actually have like a plastic shell on the inside of this so that it holds up to everything that I'm gonna do to it. Wow. So let's do that. Is this sound going to make my cat think that I'm getting cat food for her? Maybe. ASMR. Warbler scraps.
I reinforced the head with strips of warbler around the muzzle and jaw, along the top of the nose and forehead, and on the corners of the mask where the muzzle and jaw will eventually hinge, and that made for a much sturdier base, which looked like this. I then started covering the entire thing in globs of foam clay and smoothing that out as much as possible with some water, and I finished up the night by trying to carve in as much detail as I could. I added definition to the nose and snout area and covered the entire thing in teeny tiny hairlines, which, if we're being honest, probably won't all survive the drying process, but hopefully I can get some detail here.
Hello. Last night, I was able to pretty successfully get together the beginnings of our little cat head. The lower jaw isn't anchored into place yet, so you can't see exactly what it's supposed to look like, but this is a very rough visualization. Unfortunately, as I predicted, the foam clay didn't retain the detail of the fur lines that I put on here too well, but that's just how it's gonna be with foam clay. And this is gonna have a lot of other stuff on it by the time I'm done, so I'm not too broken up about it. So with this hurdle somewhat out of the way, I think today the main order of business is going to be to start working on the body of this creature, which I don't anticipate being as hard as like getting the mechanisms inside the head door, but I also haven't exactly figured out how I'm going to do the body and drape it over my body. So I am getting at least a little bit intimidated by this.
So I think my general plan for the body here is to combine my knowledge of like art doll construction with some of the methods that people use for these illusion puppets and make them like have a cat-shaped baby. Aw, speaking of cat-shaped babies. Okay, I'm getting distracted.
The journey I'm about to take you on is convoluted. So originally I wanted to construct the body using a combination of illusion puppet and art doll strategy. That's mainly because I wanted the limbs to connect to a central spine inside the body of the puppet to help support their weight and define the anatomy a little more, and to help counter the weight of the head by having a heavier back. This whole thought process was unnecessary, and I should have ignored it. So I decided to construct the arm stock for the neck portion first, and I did this very much the same way Rachel did in her video. I traced my arm onto some scrap material, estimating the neck size of an enlarged house cat, sewed that up along the edge to make a full tube, then cut a more fitted sleeve and sewed that up along the edge to serve as a channel inside the neck, so I have a place to put my arm. Beautiful. I then tried to construct a spine out of armature wire, pull noodles, and quilt batting, and this is sort of what I was trying to do. I then realized that I didn't have enough faux fur to cover the entire body, so I ended up doing a full mock-up of the entire thing anyways, which looked like this. And if you're wondering why I didn't just do the whole thing in one fabric piece like everyone else does, I don't know. I thought I was onto something, but if you do this, just do it the normal way. It's what makes sense. Also, right, it has a tail. Upon realizing I didn't have enough fabric for the whole body, I used my time to cut out a tail-shaped tube of fabric, sewed it on one edge and turned it furry side out, and twisted some quilt batting onto a bit of armature wire before slipping it into the tail-shaped tube, hence creating the tail. Now, several hours later, and with freshly washed hair, we meet again because I went out and purchased the correct amount of fabric. At this point, I cut a body-shaped tube of fabric. It was a rectangle, to be precise. Sewed that up on one side and cut little holes for the wires that were supposed to connect to the legs later, but are in reality absolutely useless. I then stuffed it with polyfill before cutting a neck-shaped tube of fabric. It was also a rectangle, and using a combination of hand sewing and hot glue, attached everything together. I would also like to use this opportunity to state how much I deeply regret using a shiny pink fabric for the base of the neck. Nothing about this looks right. The tail also got attached with gratuitous amounts of hot glue, which by the end of the night resulted in a vaguely feline worm that resembles several monstrous spirits that occupy the liminal spaces between dreaming and wakefulness. I look entirely too happy for someone who's about to get strangled by this creature. Day 3 of this project was supposed to focus both on making the legs and getting the head mechanisms working, but this is my first time rigging any kind of mechanism, so trying to figure out the eye blink, ears, and jaw took pretty much my entire day. For the eye mechanism, I did try to 3D print, but the first draft didn't turn out great, and I knew figuring out the right size would be an issue, so I opted for ping pong balls. Or at least fake little Halloween eyeball decorations from the Dollar Tree. I knew I wanted the blink to work on a horizontal axis, so I began by skewering my eyeballs with my awl. Next, I slipped them onto a wooden dowel with a bit of warpla, spacing them to keep everything in place. For this mechanism, I knew I needed to make them move in unison, so I used a bit of armature wire poked through the top to connect the two, and anchored it inside the face below another horizontal dowel rod. I used a bit of elastic connecting the two rods to hold the tension of the eyes staying open, and to make them blink, all I have to do is pull down on that connecting piece of wire, and I can tie some string onto it to pull it from whatever position my hand ends up in. To prep the eyeballs for painting, I used a little nail polish remover to rub off the original design, and added some eyelids with a little warpla. For the jaw, I planned on also having it hinge off of some dowel rods, but I couldn't rig that up until after I painted everything. At this point, everything was going surprisingly well, which of course meant my luck was coming to an end because I could not, for the life of me, make the ears work the way I wanted them to. It was looking really promising at first, but I think I flew too close to the sun on this one.
I wonder if the reason why I didn't find a tutorial for this mechanism in my research is that they're kind of really difficult to do.
I have literally taken a frustration shower, and the time since you last saw me is going to be the death of me. I've spent most of today on this freaking ear mechanism. I'm trying to add just a little bit of emotion to the ears by having just a slight movement. What I'm trying to do is just this. This seems simple enough, but the force that I have with my hand is all focused towards the front of this. There's nothing that can like do this motion here. I have all of this threaded through here to try to get them to move forward whenever I pull them, but it's just, it requires too much.
I knew I needed some kind of pulley to actually get this to work the way I had it rigged up, and unfortunately I did not have the time during this video to go to the hardware store and figure that out, so even though I got this to work with a very small movement, I did abandon the idea of having the ears move in the 11th hour in favor of having more focus on the blink and the jaw movement. I want to figure out this mechanism at some point, but that's a project for another time.
I'm trying my best, okay?
But Since I lost one fancy project detail, inevitably another must take its place. So obviously the eyes needed some LEDs. I originally rigged up a group of 6 blue LEDs on one battery. I was planning on using 3 in each of the eyeballs to really make the glow pop, but I really overestimated how many diodes I could shove in one of those tiny ping pong balls. So since I was out of blue at this point, I know, excellent planning, I wired up another set of 2 warm white LEDs, which I think was actually a better choice to match the gold of my armor.
So this whole illusion puppet looks pretty stupid without the illusion of a fake arm hanging down. So I did order one of those fake arms from that company Dapper Cadaver, but their goods are handmade and made to order. There's a possibility that it is not going to get here on time for me to film the reveal footage for this video, but I will have it whenever I use this at like Ren fairs. What I did do for this video, however, is I printed a friend. Hello, nice to meet you. What a fun item to have just in my home. It's uncanny. So my whole idea for this week is just to take this fake hand and duct tape it to some pool noodles and then put all of that into a black glove and then put my armor onto that, and hopefully it'll look like a convincing enough arm. I mean, probably.
This is exactly as simple as it sounds. I cut the pool noodle to length. I taped it to my 3D printed hand with duct tape, shoved some wire inside of it, and covered it in a black glove. For the crudest part of this entire project, the effect of this isn't half bad. It also does look kind of stupid, but it's fine.
Good morning.
Please ignore the lack of outfit continuity in this video.
For all of my tampering with mechanisms yesterday, I didn't even get to any of the limbs at all. So I have a lot of appendages to make today. Oh, hi, there you are. Let's make some hands. I picked a bad day to wear a black shirt. Oh no. Meow. I've thought about a couple of different ways to make the legs, but obviously I want them to be as light as possible. But I also want them to have like enough detail to be perceived as legs and feet. So as a base, I've dug out of storage the remnants of my old Spider Queen crinoline thing, which, I regret to inform you, has been cut up and dismantled for scrap material. There's just no way I had space to store that, but I still wanted to make it. And now, for materials, I have a bunch of leftover weird little pool noodle things that I can hopefully carve into and use as a base for some legs and paws, and then probably, where's my foam clay? Use foam clay on top of. Then I think I'm gonna try to attach it to the actual body with a combination of aluminum wire and hot glue, and prayers. But this should be light enough to work. Hopefully.
I ended up devising a pretty good way to connect everything to the body. Since this cat needs to look like it's laying down, I needed to add lumps that look like shoulder blades and back legs anyways. So I ended up making little leg and arm pillows by cutting out a rough shape using foam as base, covering that with a little faux fur to blend it in with the warm body. It sounded like I said warm bodies. Remember that weird film Warm Bodies? That was strange. And then I hot glued the two together, kind of like little seat cushions. I left a hole at the bottom open, both so that I could get stuffing inside to give them shape, and also so that I could have a hole to glue the legs into later. The bases of the legs were very sophisticated. I duct taped some scrap pool noodles together to give them a very rough shape, and then covered them in foam clay, taking care to carve out some toe beans near the front so that they actually look like paws. Full disclosure, I did end up deciding these paws were a little bit too big and carved them down a bit in the end, and I also decided I hated the back leg haunches I initially made. They were too big, so I swapped those out too. But with the assistance of movie magic, it's now time to attach the new lumps with some glue. Barge worked well enough for this, but I did end up reinforcing these with a little bit more hot glue later on. But wow, look at that. My creature is no longer so aggressively giving war. While that was drying, the paws needed some claws, so I began sculpting a few out of Warbler scraps, but ultimately switched to a polymer clay to save my fingers, and so that I could sculpt a bunch of little teeth and lots of little spikes and horns to go on the face of the creature. Speaking of horns, I was leaning towards a dragon, bird, cat, a completely normal assortment of animals, for the aesthetic of this creation. So I also wanted some central horns on the head, and I made these by wrapping some aluminum foil around some armature wire I cut to size, and globbed foam clay onto them to cover the foil up, and I don't even have to make it look good. That'll come later. I also took this as an opportunity to bulk make a bunch of other stuff, because any self-respecting dragon, bird, cat needs to be adorned with tons of scales and feathers. I also have this box of scrap foam in my basement that I can fit inside. Please give me project suggestions to get rid of this. I cannot deal with having it in my life anymore. So individually making every scale and horn and feather for this project seemed like a fitting punishment for accumulating so much of this stuff. I also had some foam dowels lying around, so I cut up some of those into lots and lots of teeny tiny scales as well to use on the face later on, but I wasn't finished with the appendages because I had yet to make wings. But the haunches I ripped off of this earlier were suspiciously wing-shaped, so I used those as a base. Once again, I stuffed them with a little polyfill and then tediously decorated them with handmade foam feathers and scales in an effort that surely took years off of my life. I finished off the wings by cutting little notches in the feathers to give them more shape, which I actually think looks pretty darn good, and they also got glued on the same way the other lumps did. I finally finished off the night by gluing some dragon scales onto the front paws. Day 5 was all about details and getting this thing prepped for painting. For starters, the face needed a little detail work, so I began by attaching the horns onto the forehead with a little hot glue, Warbler, and Violence. I glued a bunch of those tiny scales onto the face to give it a little bit more texture, and I finished off the ears by covering up the evidence of my failed mechanism with some foam clay. It was also time to put my polymer clay bits to good use, so I glued all of the teeth into place, making sure everything was positioned so the jaw could easily close. I glued on a foam tongue I had made off screen. I added a bunch of tiny spikes to the face, and glued a bit of faux fur to the back of the head so that I could glue some cool scales along the spine, which of course continued on the rest of the creature's body. But my detail-obsessed brain could not possibly stop there. What?
It's time to break out the wood carving tool!
Or I guess it's foam in this case. Was at it, I also primed the legs and face with a white base coat.
Is a cricket friend having an adventure on the face? Seems to like it. We have cricket approval on the project.
2 seconds later.
It just crawled inside of the eye, and now I want to throw up a little bit.
Once the legs were dry, I covered the parts that didn't get covered in clay and some fur, and I did make the wise decision of investing in a pet shaver for this project. So I shaved down most of the legs to a much shorter fur length. Hopefully this will help the stripes to show up better later on. I glued some fur to the back of the ears that I had already shaved earlier, and I finally attached the legs onto the body with a combination of barge and hot glue, before giving the shoulder blades, back legs, tail, and neck a bit of a shave as well.
Ended up so much bigger than I thought it would be.
A test. I can't tell. The camera's too far away. It's working. Well, well, well. If it isn't the one thing holding my will to finish this project together. Painting day. Painting day is the light at the end of the tunnel for me.
Speaking of light, now that everything was detailed, I needed to glue some LEDs onto the spine part before I paint so that I can cover up all the hot glue I used for this. Those blue LEDs I wired earlier also came in handy because since these two pieces are separate, I couldn't string my blue LEDs onto the head part, so those 6 at least helped them to taper off a little bit more naturally.
So now that I have all of my LEDs installed, it's time to get to the airbrushing. Every time I see myself next to my creation, I'm reminded that what I've made is basically as big as I am. Let's do a comparison. Why did I make it so big? It'll just add to the realism. And probably the back pain. So what I want to try to achieve with my airbrushing is kind of like a tabby cat pattern, but make it weird fantasy dragon cat creature. This has been a very spontaneous project. I'm kind of just figuring it out as I go. I'm sure the paint job will be no different. I also want to make sure that it's not so crusty. I mean, it's gonna be a little bit crusty. I'm putting paint onto fur. But whenever I made my Momo, you guys really did not seem to appreciate him nearly as much as I did. I can't imagine why, for the life of me. Apparently this is a face that only a mother could love, because he turned out pretty scrungly, and some of that was because I didn't shave his fur down, and I also like really was not careful with how I was airbrushing the fur. So he does look a little bit like a wet sewer rat, but I don't care, I love him. Being said, I think I'm going to try to avoid the wet sewer rat look with my creation here, because it's just like, it's not the vibe for a majestic creature that's as big as I am. I don't know, I'm gonna figure it out. I have my pet grooming kit. I'm gonna try to comb the fur as I go, but I also just wanna like get it done. Let's see if I can do this without making this creature scrungly.
Neglect to mention that this creature is going to be blue. It's gonna be a blue cat. So since there was so much surface area to paint, I had to really work in layers and build up the blue as I went along. I can pretty confidently say that if I did not own an airbrush, this project would not have been possible, because I'm usually pretty fast with an airbrush. And even with using one here, this took me like 2 days. But for this, I basically worked in 3 or 4 different layers of blue. I started off with a super soft light blue layer just to get some blue tones down on the fur. While I was doing these layers, I was also combing the fur between coats, which really helped the direction of the fur to stay clean and consistent. I feel pretty confident that I avoided scrungly territory on this one. That was followed by some layers of teal and then more of a cobalt blue to add a little bit more darkness and dimension to the fur. And then I went in with that dark blue airbrush color to add all of the stripes and the shadows. Also, sorry this footage is absolutely cooked. I was using my bad lens.
It is getting so blue.
To add a little bit more definition to those shadows, I also went in with a light wash of a brown-black color, and then I flipped my creature over so that I could add a little bit of color to the stomach and the paws. The stomach just got some pink tones so that it didn't look so unnaturally white, and then I gave the back paws my cat's trademark crew socks, and then darkened the front paws as well before painting all of the paw pads, dry brushing all of the claws with a tan color, and then giving the back paws Tiger's signature tan toe tips. Now it's time to start getting into all of the tedious little details. One of the big things that I wanted to do on this project was dry brush and detail all of the scales so that they have a lot of texture. So I went in with a light blue color and highlighted all of the little edges and crevices that I carved into the back scales, and then added a bit of white to the middle section to really make it pop. I then began adding some darker stripes to all the wings and immediately got indecisive about it.
Maybe I've been staring at this for too long, but I started doing this section and now I'm like, does this even look good? Should I undo it? Oh no.
But I had already done the stripes on the one side, so I just kept going.
So I did decide to go through on the stripes anyways. I think it looks mostly okay.
I did go back in with a light wash of black brown with my airbrush again to try to blend everything together, and I think it actually worked.
Okay, thankfully I think that actually helps a lot. It looks way more blended and natural now.
So I finished the detailing on those scales off, and now it was time to repeat all of those processes on the head.
So I'm really trying to give this project the most textury textures that I can. So obviously I want to make the mouth look wet. I thought about making the cat tongue hairy, but I decided that would be taking it a shade too far. Ideally, I think I would want to do this with some UV resin, but unfortunately, my UV resin curing light is like the worst purchase I've ever made. Terrible, doesn't work. I usually tend to cure things outside just with the sun, but it has been raining for the past 2 weeks. So I think I'm just gonna try to do this with my go-to enamel clear coat and see if that makes it look wet enough. I also think I'm gonna try to do a similar thing with the nose and maybe around the eyes. I don't know. Decisions.
I ended up using a combination of a couple of different clear coats to seal everything since they had different finishes. Like I said, on everything that was supposed to be wet, I used that glossy enamel clear coat because it has a really heavy finish. I ended up using that, of course, inside the mouth, on the eyeballs, and a few areas of the face like the nose and horns, and on most of the scales. For everything that wasn't supposed to look shiny or wet, I sealed with an acrylic clear coat that had a satin finish. Finish everything up completely, I closed up the hole in the neck with a little extra fabric so the stuffing can't come out, but left some magnets on there so that I can still get the battery pack in and out. I glued my LEDs into place onto my freshly glossed eyeballs. Then I was able to reinstall it in the head and get the blink mechanism working again. I then finally installed the jaw mechanism the way I mentioned doing it earlier in the video, just hinged on a dowel rod with some Warbler to keep everything in place. It was late, so I forgot to film this, but I completely finished up the head by gluing some faux fur around the face to hide all of the mechanisms and bits that were visible through the jaw. And with that, this week-long excursion into building a weird dragon bird cat has finally come to a close.
That was probably the most sweaty and uncomfortable I have ever been while filming a reveal. I am definitely not ever going to wear this ever again in the summertime. But I want to just very, very briefly, because this video is gonna probably be so very long, wrap up the project and discuss a couple of things. So overall, I would say this is quite possibly one of the most fun projects I've ever done. This summer, I've honestly been like a little I feel like the kind of stuff that I have been doing has just been a little bit repetitive and monotonous. This just sort of like lit something up in my brain chemistry. I had a really good time. I highly recommend doing something like this if you're a crafter and you would like to partake in the whimsy. I will have videos that I reference that are more like tutorial style videos in the description if you want to like try to learn from that and make your own thing. Word of advice though, if you make one of these, make it smaller than I did. I really, really love how it came out. I think the scale adds a certain level of grandeur to the whole thing, but it is like really way too heavy, kind of super difficult to carry around. But I think whenever I bring this to a Ren fair, because I still really want to try it too, I'll do like shorter stints of wearing it, maybe like an hour at a time. And before I take it out amongst the public, I'm definitely going to make some kind of like backpack rig or harness so that I can like strap it to my actual body so that my arms are not taking all of the tension and weight. The shoulder workout that I got from filming yesterday was pretty wild. Making something like that to distribute the weight is kind of the main change that I would want to make to the project. That's the only big thing. Except for the fake arm that I have, which was kind of a temporary solution in the first place, but watching the footage back, I was honest about it in the video. I put almost no effort into the fake arm, and it shows. I literally had it taped onto me with duct tape, and the sleeve was also falling off, so you can also see some of the pull noodle in the video. Not super happy about that, but it's fine. I got a notification the other day that my fake arm that I'm actually going to use is currently being built and manufactured, so I will have that soon. Finally, I would like to thank my brother, which he probably isn't even gonna watch this video, but he helped me with all the footage last night and kind of was my handler for that whole thing, and he had a lot of work on his hands. I didn't anticipate it being like as much of a, I don't want to say disaster, but a little bit. So, brother, if you're watching this, thank you again. I will buy you a burrito at some point. And that's about it. I had a good time. Thank you for watching. As always, I hope you enjoyed this even though it was very, very long. As always, the biggest thank you for this video and every single one of my videos, especially ones like these where they're not exactly cheap to produce, goes to my patrons and especially my executive producers.
Ariana Trenta, Ink Moon Arts, Ember Creeps, Jaden Cypher, Cardia X, Rat Jams, Call Me Ash, Blaze Ravenscar, Lumira, Faith, Mossy Raiden, The Real Prickly Alpaca. I'm not saying that name on the internet, ABW Makes, Sarah, Hopes and Crafts, Icegavan, A1Du, Liana, Ermler Jean, Anubix, Breeza, Sony, Brian, Phoenix, Rose Draconi, Freedom and Gus Gus, Cat, Dodo, Zyle S, Agent.Sketchy, Thea Maia, Lovisa, Eloquent Silence, Megan Penland, Enozine, India Gloom, Hypnos, Katie, Sweet Winter Garden, Gravity Drop, I Hang Out with Cats at Parties, and Bean the Bread.
What are your thoughts and feelings on all of this? Does it make you feel weird? You're kind of small compared to that.
It's okay. I still like you better.